It was the boldest rewilding experiment Britain had ever attempted, and it started with just 11 animals. On May 28, 2009, in the first licensed mammal reintroduction in British history, 3 families of Eurasian beavers captured in Norway and quarantined for months were released into freshwater lochs in Knapdale Forest, Argyll. No beaver had lived in Scotland for over 400 years. More than 10 million people encountered the story within days. But what those 11 animals did next, with nothing but mud, sticks, and instinct, would reshape entire river systems, stun the scientists monitoring them, and ignite a conflict nobody saw coming. On the morning of May 28, 2009, a convoy carrying climate-controlled crates wound its way into the heart of Knapdale Forest. Inside, 11 Eurasian beavers, 3 family groups, each animal marked and monitored, waited under the watchful eye of Dr. Bob Bell, veterinary lead for the Royal Zoological Society of Scotland. Months of quarantine and health screening at Whipsnade Zoo had cleared them for release, every protocol checked and double-checked to satisfy both government license and public health law. The stakes were unmistakable. These were the first mammals ever reintroduced to Britain by legal license, a living experiment under the gaze of scientists, policymakers, and the public. The operation unfolded over 2 days, each step documented in detail. On May 28th, the first crate was opened at Loch Dublab, dubbed Dubloch by locals. A single breeding pair slipped into the water, vanishing beneath the surface with barely a ripple. The following day, May 29th, 2 more families were released at Loch Collie Bha, each group entering a separate loch to minimize competition and maximize the chance of survival. The beavers, sourced from Norway's Telemark region, carried the genetic signature of a species absent from these waters for over 4 centuries. NatureScot, then known as Scottish Natural Heritage, stood ready to monitor every move. Camera traps, DNA sampling, and GPS tags would follow the animals' first forays into the tangled channels and reed beds. The trial's legal framework demanded independent oversight, and every action was logged for future scrutiny. The scientists knew the odds were long. 11 animals released into an ecosystem that had forgotten them, faced predators, unfamiliar terrain, and the unpredictable pressures of a Scottish spring. Yet, as the last crate was opened and the final beaver disappeared into the loch, a sense of anticipation hung over the forest. No one could predict what these 11 would do with mud, sticks, stones, and vegetation alone. The experiment was underway, and the clock had started on one of the most ambitious rewilding trials in British history. Securing permission to bring beavers back to Scotland was nothing short of a marathon. In 1995, the first feasibility study landed on government desks, but it would take more than a decade of debate, environmental assessments, and public meetings before the Scottish government finally issued a license in 2008. The initial application had been rejected in 2005, with concerns ranging from archaeological sites to the unknowns of letting a lost species loose in modern landscapes. Objections from landowners and heritage bodies forced the trial's backers, chief among them Jill Dowse, the Scottish Wildlife Trust's program manager, to agree to strict conditions, including buffer zones around monuments, ecological impact monitoring, and a 5-year scientific review. Only when every box was ticked did the green light come. Once released, the beavers wasted no time getting to work. Their instincts, honed over millennia, took over. Nights in Knapdale filled with the slap of tails and the rasp of teeth on willow and alder. Each stick was chosen, each branch dragged and wedged with precision. Mud, scooped from the loch's edge, was packed into gaps, sealing water behind the rising walls. Stones and aquatic plants were woven into the structure, transforming a trickle into a broad, glinting pond. Even in the first summer, the evidence was unmistakable. Freshly chewed stumps, muddy slides on the banks, and the first low earthen dams arching across narrow channels. Jill Dowse and her team tracked these early efforts with a mix of scientific rigor and fascination. The process was tactile, almost architectural: chew, drag, wedge, pack, repeat. Each dam was a living structure, adjusted night after night as water levels shifted. The beaver's engineering was not random, it was targeted, responding to the landscape's contours and flows. What began as a cautious experiment in policy and biology quickly became a lesson in how a handful of animals, armed only with teeth and instinct, could redraw the lines of an entire river system. The groundwork was laid for changes that would ripple far beyond those first muddy banks. Dr. Emma Thompson, a hydrologist from the University of Exeter, arrived in Knapdale with a question. Just how much could a handful of beavers change the fate of a river during Scotland's wildest storms? Over a decade, her team tracked more than 1,000 storm events, combing through winter deluges and summer downpours alike. Their approach was relentless, deploying high-frequency gauges, drone surveys, and computer models that mapped every twist and surge of water through the Beaver-engineered channels. The numbers stunned even the experts. Where beaver dams spread across a catchment, peak flood flows did not just nudge downward, they plunged. In modeled scenarios, the presence of a dense beaver dam network slashed peak discharge by an average of 60% during the worst winter storms. That is not a rounding error or a statistical fluke. It is the difference between a river bursting its banks and a landscape quietly absorbing the blow. The effect was not limited to the biggest events. Even moderate storms saw lag times stretched by hours, giving downstream towns precious breathing room. In the Knapdale tributaries, field instruments recorded a 2.5 to 3 hour delay in flood peaks after beaver colonization. Water that once raced downhill now lingered in ponds, seeped into soil, and spilled gently onto meadows. The river's pulse slowed, its violence softened by a patchwork of mud and sticks. The data held up under scrutiny. The team validated their models against in situ flow meters in Devon and Scotland, finding less than 8% error between prediction and reality. Winter after winter, the pattern repeated. Beaver ponds filled, floodwaters spread, and downstream gauges registered a muted response. Behind these numbers lies a simple truth. 11 animals, guided by instinct, had done what decades of concrete and dredging could not. Their dams worked as living levees, reshaping the hydrology of entire valleys. The headline figure, up to 60% reduction in peak flood flow, became a benchmark cited by policymakers and river managers across Britain. For a country facing ever more frequent storms, the implications were hard to ignore. The Beavers had rewritten the floodplain story, and the scientific world was left scrambling to keep up. Within a year of the Beavers' arrival, the forest's silence gave way to a new chorus. Where stagnant water once pooled, dragonflies stitched the air above mirrored ponds, and the piping calls of water rails echoed from reed beds that had not existed in living memory. The transformation was not just visible, but measurable. Local rangers, some with decades of fieldwork in Knapdale, began to notice tracks and burrows along the muddy banks, signs of water voles, a species once teetering on the edge of regional extinction. Long-term trapping grids, checked each spring and autumn, told the story in numbers. The water vole index quadrupled within a decade, rising from just over 1 capture per 100 trap nights to more than 5. The link was unmistakable. Beaver ponds, with their tangled banks and lush sedges, offered food, cover, and a refuge from predators. The beaver's impact rippled outward through the food web. Amphibians found new breeding pools in the shallow margins, while reed buntings and sedge warblers staked out territories in the dense vegetation. Otters returned to hunt in the slow, fish-rich waters behind the dams. Even the invertebrates responded. Macroinvertebrate richness in beaver-influenced streams jumped by nearly 80%, as submerged logs and fine sediments created a patchwork of new habitats. But the changes ran deeper than what could be seen from the banks. Behind every dam, water slowed and spread, and with it, fine silt and organic debris settled out. Field teams installed turbidity sondes upstream and downstream of active beaver sites. The data told a clear story. Downstream turbidity fell by 15%, and nutrient traps embedded in the dam cores captured enough nitrate and phosphate to cut concentrations by 12% and 8% respectively. In a landscape shaped by centuries of grazing and runoff, these numbers meant cleaner water, clearer spawning beds, and less algal bloom downstream. Lab technicians at NatureScot's monitoring stations ran monthly assays on water samples, tracking not just sediment, but the subtle shifts in chemistry, lower acidity, higher dissolved oxygen, and a marked reduction in agricultural pollutants. The beavers, using nothing but mud and instinct, had turned the river into a living filter. For those who walked these woods and waded these streams, the change was both scientific and deeply personal. Rangers spoke of seeing wetland birds nesting where there had been only bare mud, of finding vole burrows in places they'd never expected. The river, once written off as dead, now teemed with life at every level. The moral weight of the experiment grew heavier with each passing season. A handful of animals, given a second chance, had triggered a cascade of renewal that reached far beyond their own species. A single beaver dam can turn a trickle into a pond, but for Scotland's rivers, that power comes with a catch. Nowhere is the trade-off clearer than on the salmon streams of Argyll and Tayside. When water runs low in late summer, a freshly built dam can block the only route upstream. Fisheries manager Rob Needham still remembers the first time his team found a run of spring salmon halted by a wall of sticks and mud. The fish, stacked in the pool below, circled for days, unable to reach their spawning beds. For rivers like the Shochi Burn, where a dam once covered a purpose-built fish pass, the only option was to intervene. Each call-out came with a price, labor, equipment, and the pressure to act fast. Over the past 2 years, the mean cost per incident has settled at £1,180, a figure that covers everything from manual notching to full dam removal. It is a manageable sum for a national trust, but it adds up as the population expands. Managers have learned that brute force isn't always the answer. Instead, they have turned to a more surgical tool: dam notching. By cutting a narrow gap, just 30 centimeters wide, crews can restore fish passage without dismantling the entire structure. Trials on the River Isla showed that 94% of tagged salmon smolts made it through notched dams, a success rate that caught the attention of policymakers. The process is quick, often completed in a single morning, and leaves the beaver's handiwork mostly intact. Still, every intervention is a negotiation between the needs of a keystone engineer and the legacy of Scotland's most iconic fish. The challenge is ongoing, and each blocked channel is a reminder that even the most hopeful rewilding experiment demands constant adaptation and compromise. In the fields and riverbanks of Tayside, the story of Scotland's beaver revival took an unexpected turn. While Knapdale's trial was tightly managed, a separate population had quietly taken root in the wilds of the Tay catchment. These were not Norwegian imports, but Bavarian beavers, escapees or unlicensed releases from private collections in the early 2000s. By 2012, local farmers and anglers were spotting dam-building families on tributaries where no official release had taken place. Some greeted the newcomers with delight, others with exasperation as fields flooded or drainage ditches clogged with freshly cut willow. One landowner in Perthshire joked to a reporter, "We started with a couple of furry immigrants, now it is like a beaver boomtown out there." Official counts struggled to keep pace. NatureScot's latest national survey, using a mix of field-sign transects, camera traps, and genetic sampling, put the Scottish population at over 2,000 beavers by 2024. The Tay Basin alone now supports more than 150 family groups, outnumbering Knapdale by an order of magnitude. The numbers are not guesswork. Systematic dam and lodge mapping, combined with genetic testing, confirms a rapid expansion from those first few rogue founders. The average territory holds 8 or 9 animals, and new signs appear each spring as kits disperse up and down river corridors. The scale of change is hard to overstate. In just 15 years, Scotland has gone from 11 official beavers and a handful of unauthorized settlers to a nation where beaver activity shapes 6 major catchments. Projections from the 2024 management report suggest the population could top 10,000 by the end of this decade if current trends hold. For some, it is a marvel, a lost keystone species reclaiming its place and re-engineering the land at a pace few thought possible. For others, the sense of control has slipped. Management plans drafted for a dozen animals now face a multiplying, mobile force that does not read government licenses. As one Tayside resident put it, They are not waiting for permission, they are rewriting the rules. NatureScot's monitoring lead, Dr. Martin Gaywood, stands at the centre of Scotland's evolving beaver policy. In the early years, management often defaulted to lethal control when beavers flooded farmland or blocked culverts. But as numbers swelled and public attitudes shifted, the toolkit changed. By 2024, lethal actions had fallen sharply, from 87 licensed removals in 2021 to just 23 in the most recent year. The difference lies in a new suite of rapid response measures, dam notching, targeted relocation, and the deployment of flow devices that let water pass while keeping beaver-built structures mostly intact. Dam notching, once a novel experiment, is now a mainstay. Field teams use hand tools to cut narrow channels through problem dams, restoring fish passage without dismantling the entire structure. In trials on the River Isla, 94% of tagged salmon smolts navigated notched dams successfully. The process is quick, surgical, and leaves the beaver's engineering largely undisturbed. Where conflict persists, relocation has become the go-to option. In 2023 alone, 79 beavers were trapped and rehomed in new catchments, a move that cut local incidents by 2/3. Lethal control, once the default, is now the rare exception. Genetic stewardship has become equally vital. Early genetic surveys revealed that the Knapdale founders, all Norwegian, carried low diversity, a recipe for long-term vulnerability. In response, conservation geneticists introduced Bavarian origin beavers in 2018 and 2024, nearly quadrupling genetic diversity within the population. Ongoing DNA monitoring ensures that the mixed lineage remains robust, with scheduled assessments set for 2029. All of this is mapped onto a broader national vision. The Beaver Strategy 2022 to 2045 sets out a roadmap for coexistence, proactive monitoring, adaptive management, and a commitment to nationwide restoration. NatureScot's annual reports now read less like crisis logs and more like blueprints for living alongside a keystone engineer. The story of beaver reintroduction in Scotland is no longer just about survival or control. It is about learning to share a landscape shaped by mud, sticks, and the quiet persistence of a species returned. From just 11 beavers, Scotland's rivers now pulse with new life and new debate. Each dam they build softens floods and sparks biodiversity, yet it also stirs controversy over salmon runs and flooded fields. As policy grapples with rapid expansion, the real test is coexistence. The lesson endures. Even the smallest return can reshape a nation's future. Wonder or warning depends on what we choose next. Share your thoughts below.